Alright, what's going on guys? Today, we're going to take a look at another World Championship winning deck in Magic the Gathering's history. And this time, it's going to be the deck that won the 1996 World Championship, White Weenie, otherwise known as Mono-White Aggro. One notable aspect of this deck was that it contained blue cards in the main deck and sideboard, but contained no blue sources in the mana base. The deck was originally supposed to contain 4 copies of a Darker Wastes so that it could cast Sleight of Mind. However, when the deck was submitted, the Wastes were accidentally omitted from the deck list, so the deck had blue cards despite the fact that it had no blue mana sources to actually cast them. That's a pretty big mistake, but hey, it looks like it worked out in the end. So the 1996 World Championship would take place in Seattle, Washington, and the deck would be piloted by Chanpheng. Standard at the time was composed of a weird variety of sets, as the traditional 3-set block structure had not yet been established. So Standard included Ice Age, Alliances, 4th Edition, Chronicles, Homelands, and Fallen Empires. So what made White Weenie so successful was the power of early game white creatures. This deck played 4 copies each of Order of Leaper, Order of the White Shield, and White Knight, which pretty much exemplify what this deck is all about. The 2 orders are 2 mana 2/1s with protection from black that can pump themselves or get first strike, and White Knight has protection from black as well and first strike built in. So yeah, these don't seem like much by today's standards, but back then they were incredibly aggressive. They dodged black removal, and having 2 power and potentially first strike made them actually a force to be reckoned with in combat. So continuing with the aggro theme, the deck also ran 4 Savannah Lions as well as 2 each of Phyrexian Warbeast and Sarah Angel. Savannah Lions was one of the most powerful creatures ever printed at the time. Getting 2 power for just 1 mana was simply unheard of. You almost never got more power than the mana you spent to cast a creature, so it was practically unfair. And Phyrexian Warbeast is more typical of the time period. It's a 3 mana 3/4, but it has a very steep drawback. It deals 1 damage to you and forces you to sacrifice a land if it dies. However, this was an aggro deck, and 3 lands was typically more than you needed anyway, so it actually worked just fine. 3 mana 3/4 at the time was very good, and the land was negligible at that point. And then Sarah Angel is just a top-end threat if the game went long. While you weren't technically looking to cast anything for 5 mana, if you did get to that point, then she could close out a game, so makes perfect sense. The deck also played Reinforcements. For 1 mana, you could put 3 creature cards from your graveyard on top of your library. Technically, you are going down in card advantage by playing it. However, with only 1 copy, the idea was to be able to play it when you are running out of gas, ensuring that you'll be drawing into power for the next 3 turns. So really, it's not bad at all. Next is the removal package. The deck played 4 copies of Swords to Plowshares and 1 Reprisal, as well as a playset of Disenchants in the main deck. Swords to Plowshares is the OG creature removal spell, and is basically the old school equivalent of Path to Exile. 1 mana instant speed removal is always good, and the drawback in this case is that your opponent is going to gain some life, and Reprisal on the other hand just kills big things. And then we come to Disenchant. Now, Disenchant sounds like a weird main deck choice, but you have to realize pretty much every single deck in existence was doing some crazy and stupid stuff with artifacts and enchantments. So chances were you were going to need it. And if you don't believe me, just wait until you see what we are about to get into. So to start off, the deck played Land Tax, Balance, and Armageddon. Okay, so Land Tax is kind of crazy. It's a 1 mana enchantment that says if an opponent has more lands than you at the beginning of your upkeep, you get to search for 3 lands and put them into your hand. And there is, of course, nothing saying that you have to play those, so you could actually drain your deck of lands so that you draw into more gas with your aggro deck. Balance, on the other hand, makes each player sacrifice creatures, lands, and discard cards so that everyone has the same amount. This deck looked to empty its hand pretty quick, and it didn't need too many lands, so this was usually favorable by itself, and it had a lot of synergy with these other cards, which we'll get to in a second. And then Armageddon. Well, yeah. it destroys all lands. Not only did this deck not need a ton of lands to begin with, but with land tax, you could fill your hand with lands and then blow up all the ones in play. You could then start rebuilding your board while your opponent is left in top deck mode. Yikes. But wait, there's more, because the deck also played Lodestone Bauble and Zuran Orb. Okay, so Lodestone Bauble puts 4 lands from someone's graveyard on top of a player's library. Zuran Orb lets you sacrifice lands to gain 2 life. So first off, the Bauble works with things like, say, Armageddon. You can blow up all the lands and then put 4 on top of your library, so you're guaranteed to draw into lands and your opponent isn't. You could also brick your opponent's draws. If you're ahead on the board, you can blow up lands and then throw some on top of your opponent's library, basically stalling them out for 4 turns. These 2 also work nicely against burn decks. Sacrifice 4 lands, gain 8 life, put 4 on top of your library, gain 8 more life over the next few turns. That's basically Burn's worst nightmare. Sounds horrible. Zuran Orb also worked well with Restore Balance. You could sacrifice all your lands, gain a bunch of life, and then force your opponent to sacrifice all their lands. It also worked well with land tax. Sacrifice lands until you have less than your opponent. Search for 3 lands with land tax, play and sacrifice those for more life, while continuously searching for more lands over and over again. And yeah, see what I'm talking about? It's kind of crazy. Like, there's a lot of interactions between these cards. But the point is, this is an aggro deck. It's looking to be aggressive. It wants to lay down creatures and quickly kill you with them. And yet, look at this. Decks were always playing just a giant cluster of cards that had all kinds of overlapping synergies in addition to whatever the main plan was. And that is why cards like Disenchant were totally viable options for the main board. Yeah, it's all kind of ridiculous. And then the last card in the deck was Sleight of Mind, which the deck couldn't cast. There were no blue sources of mana. Chanpheng submitted his deck list incorrectly, forgetting to write down for a Darkar Waste, so there was literally no blue mana sources in the deck. Whoops. Alright, let's move on. We'll take a look at the mana base. The deck ran 4 copies each of Mishra's Factory and Strip Mine. Mishra's Factory is basically an early version of Blinkmoth Nexus. It taps for colorless mana and can animate into a 2/2 assembly worker, and it can pump up other assembly workers. So yeah, very similar to Blinkmoth Nexus. Strip Mine, on the other hand, was a colorless land that could blow up your opponent's lands. It's a classic card that's comparable to Field of Ruin in Modern at the moment, and was basically played in every single deck ever. Like, there was no reason not to. The deck also played 1 Keldoran Outpost and 15 Plains. The Outpost forces you to sacrifice a Plains when it comes into play, but afterwards it can start pumping out soldier tokens, so that's pretty cool. And next we'll take a super quick look at the sideboard. The sideboard contained an extra copy of Reprisal, as well as Exile and Serrated Arrows, all of which help with removing different types of creatures. Next it played Spirit Link, which gave a creature lifelink, and Energy Storm, which hosed burn decks and anything looking to attack with flyers. There was also an extra copy of Keldoran Outpost, as well as Black Vice, which is like the Rack in reverse, punishing people for having too many cards in their hand. And then Divine Offering destroyed artifacts, and Aaron's Son's Aura could blow up enchantments. It also should have been able to counter enchantments, but, well, that requires blue mana sources. Oh, and speaking of blue mana sources, it also had an extra copy of Sleight of Mind in the sideboard, which it couldn't cast. Yeah, awkward. And that's it. That is a White Weenie. The principal concept isn't terribly complicated. Lay down some fast, aggressive white creatures and swing away with them while keeping the board clear with removal spells. A classic archetype, a classic, way of playing the game. Play fast creatures, blow up your opponent's creatures, kill them quickly. But man, that little Lands Matters package gave this deck a lot of crazy lines to take while you were playing the thing, so kind of interesting. Anyway, that's the deck that won the Magic the Gathering World Championship in 1996. Now, you are a little bit more familiar with Magic the Gathering's history and another classic deck from the early days of the game. If you want to see more decks like this, check the description, as I have an entire playlist with these things, and be sure to subscribe, as there will certainly be more to come in the future. But in the meantime, thanks for watching guys, and I will see you in the next one.